Abandoned pregnant girlfriend's true struggle transforms millionaire's heart in an ama. Brian Hartley sat in his penthouse office overlooking the busy streets of Dallas, exuding an air of success that those who crossed his path envied. His colleagues saw him as the quintessential self-made millionaire, sharp suits, a commanding presence, and an ambition that felt almost insatiable. But beneath the polished surface, a seeping void clawed at him. Years of relentless pursuit for success left him numb, especially today, as an unexpected email from a mutual friend flickered on his screen. There, in the subject line, was her name, Sarah. The high school sweetheart he hadn't thought about in years, now positioned at the precipice of his thoughts, conjuring fragmented memories of laughter and warmth. He reread the email as if searching for something, a sign, perhaps. Thoughts raced, memories intertwining with doubts. Had he traded love for ambition? Shortly thereafter, the familiar cafe buzzed with laughter and clinking mugs. When he finally laid eyes on Sarah, visibly pregnant and beaming amidst the cozy atmosphere, a knot tightened in his chest. The contrast of her easy smile against his calculated reality struck him hard. She had battled life's storms alone, carving out a new path that required a strength he had never truly acknowledged. Why hadn't he reached out sooner? Their conversation unfolded, tentative yet electric, each exchanged word peeling back layers of guilt and yearning. Sarah spoke of sleepless nights, balancing a demanding job while preparing to welcome a child, all without any support. Her resilience resonated with Brian, illuminating the depth of his own emptiness, a stark realization that wealth had never equated to substance. Yet, as fragments of their connection reignited, doubts clouded his mind. "Keep your past buried," a colleague's voice echoed, reminding him of the ruthless corporate ladder he'd climbed. "You can't let them see you as anything but a success." Those words threatened to suffocate him, clashing with an internal urge to help the woman he once loved. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now, let's continue. As their talk deepened, Brian could feel the weight of his previous life pressing down on them. The contrast was unbearable, his world filled with superficial victories, while Sarah navigated authentic struggles. But soon a shadow cast over their reunion when Sarah hesitated, revealing a secret that had burrowed deep into her heart. With quivering lips, she disclosed a painful truth, one that commanded Brian to confront not just her struggles, but also his own. Moral compass. Brian's chest tightened, the air thick with unvoiced emotions. The choice loomed large and unforgiving: help Sarah and shatter the polished facade he had worked so hard to maintain, or protect the reputation that had become his armor. The conflicting emotions of guilt, fear, and lingering affection threatened to unravel him. The quiet cafe transformed into a battleground of consequences, each option tugging at the thread of his soul. As distant cries of a baby echoed softly, they both turned towards the sound, realizing that a new life could either offer them hope or dredge them deeper into their complicated past. Standing at a precipice, Brian's heart raced, unsure if he stood on the edge of redemption or the wreckage of a closed chapter. Each moment and choice a testament to what could be lost or found if only he dared to take a step forward. The air was thick with unspoken words as Brian sat there, grappling with the enormity of Sarah's revelation. She stared at him, eyes searching for clarity, but all he could provide was a numb silence. Each heartbeat felt like a countdown, pulling him deeper into a chasm of his own making. The clock ticking above them took on a mocking quality, an incessant reminder that time was not on his side. The thoughts spiraling in his mind felt akin to a fierce storm. Which path should he choose? Each choice presented a shadowed reflection of who he was and who he could become. In the corporate world, he had learned to make decisions quickly, each one calculated and strategically flawless. Now, confronted with a vulnerability he had seldom allowed himself to feel, he was paralyzed, clinging to the threads of self-constructed confidence while his spirit began to fray. "Brian, I need to know if you're willing to be in this with me," Sarah's voice cut through the fog. The challenge in her tone stirred something within him, compelling him to sift through the layers of his fabricated identity. Could he step outside of his polished world? Could he really be there for Sarah? He inhaled sharply, sensing the weight of her gaze. "You don't need to do this alone," he finally managed to say, surprising himself. Yet, with those words came the realization of what he might lose. His reputation as a savvy businessman stood on a precarious edge, built on the illusion of invulnerability. But as he glanced at the light spilling in from the cafe windows, illuminating not just Sarah but the whole world, clarity seeped into his consciousness. "I've built an empire," he said, the words feeling foreign yet liberating on his tongue. "But I don't want to build more walls between us." The revelation struck him. His ambition had forged a barrier, isolating him in a fortress of success. He often dismissed emotional connections as distractions, yet here was Sarah, personifying everything he had suppressed: warmth, authenticity, the kind of real struggle he had only ever observed from a safe distance. With each shared observation about their lives, the fabric of Brian's identity began to unravel, exposing threads of self-doubt. The timelines of their lives had intersected again, and he was birthed anew amidst this shared reality. Perhaps this was the juncture to rediscover himself, not through acclaim or financial triumphs, but through genuine connection and kindness. "What if we could find a way to help each other?" he proposed, sensations of hope battling the lingering fears. "I can help you manage your workload, and maybe together we can create something meaningful that gives this new life a fighting chance." Sarah's smile flickered, hesitant yet encouraging. She wasn't just looking for financial assistance. She yearned for partnership, for connection, something genuine to focus on while navigating the wilderness of impending motherhood. The potential to redefine their relationship loomed, casting shadows of dread mingled with the flickering flames of something resembling joy. Brian took a decisive breath, every molecule within him igniting with resolve. No longer would he let fear dictate his decisions. It was time to leverage his resources for something that mattered deeper than profit margins. They could face these challenges together, tearing down the walls around their hearts one conversation at a time. As he left the cafe, adrenaline coursed through him, a strange blend of excitement and trepidation. The city buzzed with life, parallel to the electric current thrunning through his veins. The crossroads of ambition and emotional investment held an undeniable allure. What had started as a simple reconnection had now become a journey towards growth, transparency, and love. Yet as Brian stepped outside, ready to confront the world anew, the thought of his colleague's potential scorn loomed. The whispers of judgment and betrayal began to swirl in his mind, a haunting reminder of everything he stood to lose. He could feel the pull of the corporate world tightening like a vice, challenging his newfound commitment to authenticity. The moment of truth was approaching, and he would soon have to navigate not just his internal truths, but also the volatile external landscape of his professional life. Would he stand firm against the tide, or would he allow the fears of his past to dictate his future? With determination building anew, he resolved to take the steps necessary towards not just personal reconciliation, but also professional redemption. All of this, he realized, would require confronting not just the shadows of his past, but also the dark realities of those who thrived on his adherence to the status quo. Facing the inevitable confrontation with his fellow executives, Brian felt a strange mix of dread and conviction. It was a gamble, but one he was now willing to take. The time had come to face them all, the ones who would have to reckon with the man Brian chose to become. Brian's heart thudded in his chest as he entered the office building, the familiar scent of polished wood and expensive cologne mixing with his rising anxiety. He had spent years crafting this world, one where every decision was made with precision. But today, he walked a tightrope stretched across a chasm of uncertainty. Each step closer to the boardroom felt heavier than the last. He clenched his jaw, recalling Sarah's words, her vulnerability unearthing truths he had buried under layers of ambition. He could already picture the smug expressions of his colleagues, the unyielding drive for profit and conformity pressing against him like a weight straight out of a nightmare. Brian's palms slicked against his blazer as he approached the conference room, a fortress of traditional corporate power filled with men and women who thrived on the illusion of control. What had once filled him with pride now felt like shackles, and every inch he moved forward felt like a betrayal of the persona he had constructed. He had been a king in the realm of commerce, but now he sought to dismantle that empire, brick by brick. The moment he stepped through the threshold, their judgments would rain down like a storm. "Brian," Caleb, one of the senior executives, called out, a hint of amusement lining his tone. "Guess you decided to join us after all. We were beginning to think—" "Let's get started," Brian interrupted, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. He needed to cut through the trivial exchanges, to assert his presence as more than just a figurehead in this room. A collective hush fell over the table as he took his place at the head, acutely aware of the scrutiny pinning him down. The agenda lay spread before him like a map of distant lands, with every number, every projected growth percentage looming larger than life. He drew a steady breath, steeling himself for the heaviest weight he would bear that day: authenticity. "Before we discuss the quarterly reports, I have something important to address," he began, his voice steady even as doubt gnawed at him. He felt their eyes bore into him, curiosity and skepticism mingling in the air. "I believe it's time we reassess not just our strategies for profit, but our overall mission as a company." Murmurs rippled through the group, skepticism more palpable than the coffee brewing in the corner. The core of resignations had always been financial, but his vulnerability now dared to breach those unspoken boundaries. "I recently had a life-altering conversation, and I've come to realize that sustainable success rests in our ability to connect, not just in profit margins, but in how we uplift those around us." "Life-altering? That's unexpected. Enlighten us," Caleb prodded, a smirk playing at the edges of his lips, as if daring Brian to unravel. There it was, a test, the choice manifested. Would he retreat into safety, or would he forge a new path forward? Drawing upon Sarah's strength, he found a flicker of vulnerability and pushed past the instinct to shield himself. "I'm not here to manage our lives according to outdated paradigms," he continued, emphasizing each word as if it were a deliberate strike against a fortress. "I want to understand what it looks like to prioritize our people, our employees, their struggles." The atmosphere shifted slightly. Surprise cracked the hard exteriors some had donned. But then questions followed like ducks in a row, skepticism knitting brows once more. His intentions questioned, juxtaposed against years of self-preservation shaped by corporate ironies. Is this really about uplifting our people, or is it about a personal situation? A female executive challenged unflinchingly. Brian winced but stood firm, the hint of a challenge igniting in his gut. It reminded him of how comfortably he had silenced his own emotions, allowing them to be a mere footnote in the boardroom discussions. "It's about both. I want to lead a company that doesn't just succeed on paper, but embodies what it means to truly thrive." A moment of silence hung in the air, tension palpable as they exchanged glances. He had raised the stakes, inviting them into the raw honesty he had once shunned. The fear of exposure clashed with his growing resolve. He was no longer the man they thought they knew. The door opened, and their attention shifted momentarily as a young employee entered, nervous yet resolute. "Brian, you have a visitor," she said, her eyes darting anxiously among the executives. The unexpected intrusion jolted Brian back to the present moment, but deep down he sensed the manifestation of his choices. Whoever was on the other side of that door might very well tip the scale between his old life and the one he was starting to embody. Would he embrace this intruder as part of his transformative journey, or would he retreat once again into the shadows of his fear? As he processed that, he understood that this was merely the beginning. Both personally and professionally, the storm was a precursor to growth. "Let him in," Brian commanded, each word crackling with the tension mounted in the room. The moment of truth was drawing near, and he was ready to face whatever awaited him. The door swung open, revealing a figure that pulled Brian from the clutches of uncertainty. Emma, his college sweetheart, and the last person he expected to see, stood trembling at the threshold. Her apprehension was palpable, her eyes darting between the gathered executives. "Emma, what are you doing here?" Brian's voice stumbled over the words, disbelief mingling with rising anxiety. The entire conference room buzzed with hushed whispers. The executives intrigued yet wary, more personal drama unfolding in their already precarious meeting. "I wanted to talk," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I reached out, but I couldn't wait any longer. I need to understand. I need you to understand." Behind him, murmurs flourished into a cacophony, each executive intrigued by the unexpected turn of events, while Brian felt exposed to the open judgment in the air. "I'll be right back," he asserted, the urgency in his voice a thin layer over the chaos swirling in his gut. He walked toward Emma, each step weighted with the ramifications of both their histories and the moment unfolding. He motioned for her to follow, guiding her away from prying ears and curious gazes. "Can we talk in private?" he asked, the formality slipping from his tone as he led her into a small conference room nearby, his heart thrumming like a wild drum. The door clicked shut behind them, isolating them in a small bubble of tension. "What's going on, Emma? I can't just drop everything right now," he insisted, trying to maintain the professional shield he had so carefully constructed. Tears welled in her eyes, but she held them back. "Brian, maybe you don't even know, but your life has changed too. We're not just kids anymore. I'm pregnant." The words broke through the fog hanging in the air, sharp and raw. Brian's breath caught in his throat. The weight of impending responsibility crashed over him. This was not just a revelation, but a reckoning that threatened to unravel every carefully calculated plan he had forged. The burgeoning world he had envisioned at work didn't include this kind of chaos, this potential ruin. "So now that you've found success, is that when you decide to come back into my life?" he spat, a hint of anger struggling for dominance against the overwhelming shock. "I didn't come back for a fairy tale." Emma's voice altered. It was steadier now, steeped in assertion. "I'm here because I need you to see that it's not just about you anymore. If you really want to uplift your people, you have to begin by confronting your own fears and responsibilities." Her words dug deep into him, unearthing layers of guilt wrapped tightly around aspirations. As the CEO of a thriving firm, Brian had meticulously crafted an image of control. The thought of vulnerability had been synonymous with weakness, yet here she was, crashing through that illusion with rugged honesty. "I didn't want it like this," he confessed, the truth escaping his lips before he could seize it. "I've spent my life building something to be proud of, something that feels solid, unlike—" he gestured helplessly, "this. It's fragile because you're treating it like a business transaction. This is real life, Brian." Emma's fierce gaze held him captive, reflecting both resignation and sincerity. "If you're searching for authenticity in your company, you must first recognize it within yourself." He felt the walls he had erected crumbling, her words sparking a cascade of choices and ethical dilemmas he had long avoided. This was not merely a decision born from ambition, it was a chance to redefine what success meant. But can I even do this? He wondered aloud, grappling with the shadows of past neglect dragging along behind him. Would he continue to embrace the image of power and success, or would he strive for something more meaningful? As he searched for answers, his thoughts tangled between personal aspiration and the gravity of impending fatherhood. What was he really building in life? An empire or a legacy? With a newfound clarity coursing through him, Brian understood that this conversation was far from the end. It was a starting point for a new chapter. He took a deep breath, bracing for the tidal wave of shifts that lay ahead, both in the office and with Emma. "Let's go back," he finally said, his resolve hardening. "I want to confront my team about this, not just the business side, but the personal journey as well." As they stepped back into the boardroom, Brian felt a flicker of hope amid terror. With each deliberate step, he recognized the transformational path unfolding before him, knowing it wouldn't be easy, but it would be authentic. He was ready to face the consequences of his choices and ready to begin anew. But the shadow of doubt lingered. The real question loomed. Could he balance the weight of his new responsibilities while navigating the rigid landscape of corporate expectations? And would his colleagues stand by him, or would he find himself isolated once more? The atmosphere in the boardroom shifted as Brian re-entered, Emma by his side, the powerful executives now indifferent to the unfolding drama. All eyes turned towards him, their expressions a blend of curiosity and skepticism. He felt the weight of their scrutiny with every heartbeat. "I have something important to share," Brian began, his voice steady but carrying the remnants of vulnerability he just unearthed. The assembled team leaned in, their sharp business acumen more attuned to deals than personal revelations. "Life has taken an unexpected turn for me, one that I can't ignore any longer," he continued, feeling the gravity of the words he was about to utter. "I'm going to be a father." A momentary silence enveloped the room, disbelief hanging in the air, followed by a cacophony of murmurs. He knew he was swimming against the tide of corporate decorum, but the facade he had carefully cultivated no longer felt compatible with the reality of his circumstances. "Brian," one executive finally interjected, his voice dripping with skepticism, "that's admirable, but what does this mean for the company, our direction?" "Everything," Brian interjected, surprising even himself with the force of his conviction. "I've been focused solely on results, profits, and my carefully structured goals. But I realize now that true leadership begins with authenticity. If I'm to guide you all, I need to embrace my vulnerabilities instead of hiding from them." Emma watched him with a mix of pride and apprehension from where she stood. As he spoke, she felt a shifting energy in the room. This was no longer just about the question of professional capability. It was about taking a stand for personal growth. Leadership isn't only about setting targets, it's about connection, understanding our purpose as individuals who strive something greater than numbers on a balance sheet, he continued, his voice gaining momentum. "I'm determined to build a culture here where we embrace our challenges, support each other, and recognize that our personal lives affect our professional ones." The executives exchanged glances, some nodding, others still wary. Brian found himself wondering how they saw him now. Was he the ambitious young CEO they had once admired, or had vulnerability chipped away at that image? "Brian, this is a significant departure from your previous stance," another executive remarked, suspicion threading through her tone. "Are you certain this isn't an impulsive decision?" "Perhaps," he countered, "but what I'm certain about is that my life has altered in a way that demands I reassess everything I thought I understood about success." There was a tension in the air, and Brian realized it wasn't just about their perceptions. It was about his own expectations of himself. Could he align the vast chasm between ambition and authenticity while still leading this company effectively? The uneasy silence persisted, and a question sprang to his mind. What if they doubted his capability to navigate this shift? Self-doubt crept in, shading his confidence like storm clouds looming on the horizon. Yet, amidst it all, a glimmer of resolve began to cultivate within him. If he wanted to lead authentically, he had to confront any potential backlash head-on. "Listen," he said, shifting gears with palpable determination. "We can still achieve our objectives, but I will do so with transparency. I need every one of you to join me on this journey of personal and professional integration." "Integrating personal journeys into corporate goals is challenging," one executive replied, crossing his arms. "Where's the plan? How will that manifest in our projects?" Brian leaned forward, acknowledging the concern with a firm nod. "I don't have all the answers yet, but I'm ready to forge a plan together. I want input from all of you. How can we transform this company into a place that respects our lives beyond work? I'm open to suggestions." The conversation flickered with tentative energy, the executives shifting as they entertained the prospect of change. Brian's heart raced, a thrilling concoction of fear and exhilaration surging through him. As the dialogue unfolded, he found himself animated, ideas sparkling with a fresh light as he realized they could collaborate not just for profit, but for a shared legacy, a workplace rich in empathy and understanding. But even as he felt propelled forward, a gnawing uncertainty consumed him. If he was laying bare his vulnerabilities here, would he face inevitable losses ahead? Would the experiment of authenticity displace him from favor, or would it break down the barriers he had unintentionally erected? All around him, shifts began to take root in the conversation, glimmers of participation sparkling in the executive's eyes. Could he be the CEO who not only shaped a prosperous company, but also transformed a culture of fear into one of solidarity? Brian's vision began to crystallize amidst these moments. Questions. But before he could delve deeper, Emma's voice pulled him from his reverie. "Brian, we need to talk after this. I have my own questions to ask." The urgency in her tone sent a shiver down his spine. What had she observed? Could his newfound commitment to authenticity withstand the weight of their conversation later? An anxious thrill coursed through him as he prepared to continue navigating this unpredictable landscape. As conversations heated around him, Brian knew this was just the beginning. He was on the precipice of change, both in his personal life and his role as a leader. How far could he go with this newfound clarity before potentially losing it all? The murmurs quieted as Brian tried to gather his thoughts amidst the whirlwind of excitement and trepidation swirling around him. The eyes of the executives were not just watching, they were weighing, appraising the merit of a new vision that conflicted sharply with the traditional metrics of success. He could feel the pressure to conform, to revert to the clean-cut, ambitious persona they had known. But there was a burgeoning resolve within him, fueled by the juxtaposition of his impending fatherhood and the company's future. "Okay, let's get practical," Brian said, forcing his voice to sound more assured than he felt. "If we want to embrace this new philosophy of leadership, one built on authenticity, we need actionable goals. It starts with us. How do we begin shifting the culture?" One executive, Mark, a longtime skeptic of Brian's loftier ideals, leaned back in his chair, a predatory glint in his eyes. "Brian, you're talking about a fundamental change in how we assess our teams. People will have to open up in ways we've always kept behind closed doors. Can we afford that kind of risk?" The doubt in Mark's voice echoed Brian's own fears. Could he really lead in a way that encouraged vulnerability while managing the inevitable performance pressures? Would his colleagues see his commitment as a weakness? "I believe we can't afford not to," Brian replied, feeling his pulse quicken. "If we're going to thrive, we need to harness the emotional intelligence that helps us connect better. If employees feel valued, their productivity will reflect that. Soft nods emerged in pockets of the room, but Mark's skepticism held fast. And when that emotional connection doesn't translate to quarterly results, what's the backup plan? Results should not be the only measure of success, Brian insisted, fighting to keep his voice steady. We need to redefine our KPIs to include employee engagement and well-being. Metrics can evolve, just as we do. If we don't adapt, we risk becoming stale. The atmosphere shifted slightly, an undercurrent of tension mingling with genuine curiosity. Brian sensed he was striking a chord, a shared hope in the room for a workplace that recognized the human element beyond numbers. "Let's brainstorm," another executive chimed in, her tone suggesting she was beginning to see the vision. "Encourage dialogue about personal struggles and victories within our teams?" Brian could hardly believe the question had emerged. It felt like a pivotal moment. "We start small. How about dedicated space in meetings to share personal milestones, both triumphs and hardships? It could be a kudos segment, but more intimate." "And what if it's too intimate?" Mark countered. "You open that door and it could become a free-for-all. Not everyone wants the world to know their business." "But that's the beauty of it," Brian countered, leaning closer. "Creating an environment where sharing is voluntary fosters a bond of trust. It also allows us to understand our colleagues on a deeper level. Winning together, failing together. Isn't that how we truly become a team?" The group began to engage, a dialogue rising with tension and potential. Brian felt excitement surging through him, yet he wondered if this was merely a facade. Was he so caught in the ideal of connection that he was losing sight of his duties as a leader? As conversations around him expanded, he found his mind drifting back to Emma. What had she noticed that prompted her urgency before? Did she see the cracks beginning to form in his commitment? The thought nagged at him, unsettling the newfound coherence he grasped so tightly, yet he could not ignore her. She was part of this journey, too. After wrapping up the meeting, he sought out Emma, rehearsing the conversation in his mind like a script preparing for an audition. The weight of the day pressed on him as he moved through the office, a labyrinth of glass and steel reflecting a myriad of anxieties. When he found her in an empty conference room, Emma looked both resolute and fragile. "I hope you know what you're stepping into, Brian," she said, her voice a blend of concern and support. "This is about more than just changing how we work. It's about changing how we think." "I think I'm starting to understand," he replied, searching her gaze for affirmation. "But there's so much at stake. What if I can't see it through?" "Because you've always relied on your plans to make decisions. This time, if you lean into the uncertainty and embrace who you are, you might just discover something remarkable about yourself." Her words ignited something deep within him. Yet a knot still twisted in Brian's stomach. Could he truly navigate this new path without losing himself? Without jeopardizing his vision, his aspirations, and now his family? As he stood there, the internal conflict and external expectations coalesced into a simple but daunting realization. The true test of his leadership could lie not in strategy or results, but in the raw, exposed vulnerability he now sought to embrace. The room pulsed with energy as he held her gaze, questions unasked reverberating in the space between them. Feeling the gravity of what lay ahead, a singular thought solidified in his mind. The time had come to face decisions that could redefine not just a company, but the very essence of who he was becoming. But the deeper he delved, the more questions emerged. What if shedding his masks only revealed a man he didn't recognize? How would he navigate the unknown? As new uncertainties loomed, Brian realized he was teetering on the brink of a transformation that could both uplift and dissolve everything he had built. What came next could either save him or unravel everything in an unexpected way. Was he truly ready to explore this uncharted territory of authenticity, or would the changes cost him everything? The following days were a blur of long hours and meetings, but Brian felt a subtle shift within himself, one that both excited and terrified him. He found himself increasingly invested in the idea of authenticity, viewing it not just as a corporate strategy, but as a personal philosophy. With each passing moment, he wrestled with insecurities about leading others, while grappling with his own shifting identity. The exhilaration of inspiring others conflicted ominously with his fear of exposing his vulnerabilities. During one of the strategy sessions, Brian proposed a new initiative, a series of workshops aimed at fostering emotional awareness. It was met with cautious optimism, but Mark's skepticism still loomed like an ominous cloud. "It's noble, Brian, but can we really measure the success of feelings?" Mark challenged, eyebrows knitted in disbelief. "It's not about measurability in the short term," Brian replied, fighting against the all-too-familiar feeling of being cornered. "It's about investing in our people, presenting them with tools to discover their own strengths. The more equipped they are emotionally, the more likely we are to see results." Inwardly, Brian felt unsteady confronting Mark's opposition, the very embodiment of the corporate cynicism he wanted to dismantle. Could he continue to carry this vision when faced with so much doubt? Was fighting for these ideals becoming an emotional battleground he wasn't sure he could conquer? As Brian walked to his desk, he reflected on the workshop structure. Planning alone was no longer sufficient. He felt increasingly drawn to engage with his colleagues personally. In an act of impulse, he decided to reach out to some team members to gather their thoughts. Previously focused solely on policies and metrics, he now turned to their insights, actively listening, rediscovering the people behind the roles. On a quiet afternoon, Brian approached Sarah, a junior team member known for her diligent work, yet often overlooked by others. "Mind if we chat for a moment?" he asked, gesturing toward an empty meeting room. As they settled in, he instinctively put on his leader facade, but her soft smile disarmed him. "What do you think about the idea of sharing personal stories in our workshops?" he began, meeting her gaze. "I think it could be scary for some," she replied hesitantly, "but it might help us connect better. So many of us feel like just numbers, you know?" A jolt of recognition coursed through him. This was the very essence of his vision. "Exactly," he replied, buoyed by her honesty. "What would make it feel safe?" Sarah pondered. "Maybe if we had some guidelines, and possibly an option to share anonymously." Her suggestions ignited thoughts in Brian's mind, and he felt himself smiling genuinely for the first time that week. "That's brilliant, thank you," he breathed out, leaving their conversation feeling lighter, as if a weight had begun to lift. In the days that followed, this newfound approach influenced not only his planning, but also how he interacted with Emma. He started sharing bits of his vulnerabilities with her, expressing his worries about their family's future and how the company climate would evolve. Each disclosure seemed to breach a barrier. He understood the risk of being this open, but found reassurance in the strength of these connections. Conversations with Emma began to morph their relationship. She observed this change, a spark returning to her eyes. "You seem different, Brian, more relaxed," she noted one evening. "I've been thinking about my impact," he admitted, feeling the warmth of her approval. "What if embracing authenticity shifts everything, not just at work, but with us too?" He could see her considering his words closely, and in that moment he felt as if they were both stepping into the unknown together. With each admission, the knot in his stomach loosened slightly, paving the way for clarity. Yet trepidation lingered. The journey toward authenticity had erupted with possibilities, but lurking shadows reminded him of the stakes involved: his family's stability, the perception of his leadership, the fragile trust building within his company. Just then, an unexpected email notification pinged on his phone, freezing him in his tracks. It was from Mark, subject line, "Kurt, we need to talk." Brian's heart raced. Was this the moment that could change everything? They could either align as allies or solidify their discord. He took a deep breath, preparing for yet another confrontation. It felt like navigating a minefield where one misstep could derail everything he had begun to build. How could he prepare for the unexpected twist this conversation could bring? He brushed his palm over the desk, feeling the tension of the unknown thrumming beneath his fingertips. As he gathered his thoughts for the impending discussion with Mark, one question loomed above all. How far was he willing to go to protect his vision when everything he cared about was at risk? The air in Brian's office felt heavy as he read Mark's email again, its simplicity amplifying his anxiety. He had championed a vision that diverged from traditional metrics, and Mark was a believer in those metrics, clinging to them as an anchor in a disorienting sea of corporate change. Hours passed slowly as he prepared for their meeting. Doubts crept into his mind, each more damaging than the last. What if this meeting obliterates everything he'd begun to build? He attempted to strategize every possible response, every argument he would need to state his case clearly. Not just the workshops, but for the sense of authenticity he craved to propagate throughout the company. When the clock struck 2, the tension in his chest grew palpable. He rounded a corner to find Mark waiting for him in the conference room, arms crossed, and an expression that betrayed little. As Brian entered, he forced a steadying breath, realizing he was stepping into the very battleground he was afraid of. "Thanks for coming, Brian," Mark began, his tone surprisingly even. "I wanted to discuss the new initiative you're pushing." A ping of adrenaline coursed through Brian. "I appreciate the opportunity to share more about it," he replied, maintaining eye contact. Mark leaned back in his chair, his gaze piercing. "Let's break this down. You want to create an environment where everyone shares their feelings. But feelings are subjective. How do we know this will lead to improvement in productivity and morale?" Brian clenched his fists under the table to hide his unease. True, measuring feelings directly might be challenging, he conceded. But they're foundational. When employees feel seen and valued, it can transform the culture, affecting retention and engagement. It's a long-term investment. "Long-term investments need tangible results," Mark countered. "This seems more like therapy than a business strategy. How do we justify this to higher-ups?" Brian's pulse quickened. He felt cornered, but amidst the tension, a flicker of determination ignited. He leaned forward slightly. "What if we reframe the question? Rather than asking for justification, let's ask how investing in people can lead to a healthier bottom line. Isn't that the goal?" Mark's response was delayed, clearly taken aback. "That's a fair point, but this requires a cultural shift. It brings vulnerability to the workplace. Are you willing to lead by example?" That was a direct challenge, one Brian had anticipated, yet felt entirely unprepared for. He hesitated, recalling his recent conversations with Emma and Sarah. "I am. I've started sharing more of my journey, my struggles as well as my successes, with the team. I want to encourage them to do the same." Mark studied him for a long moment. "That could be a double-edged sword, Brian. Vulnerability can lead to strength, but it can also create fractures." The weight of Mark's observation hit hard. Brian recognized the risk, but also the potential reward. The more he reflected, the clearer his vision became. It wasn't mere idealism. It was a strategy rooted in humanity, something that had been missing in their competitive atmosphere. "Maybe it's the fractures that we need to address," Brian proposed. "Authenticity could create deeper bonds. We're not just cogs in a machine. We're individuals who bring unique experiences and insights. Harnessing that can elevate our performance." A moment of silence enveloped them, during which Brian wondered if he was losing ground or planting seeds of change. Finally, Mark sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Let's say I'm open to considering this. I want to see your framework outlined clearly. If I'm presenting this to the board, they'll want specifics, not concepts." "Of course," Brian said, relief flooding him. I'll put together a detailed outline, including clear objectives, expected outcomes, and how we can incrementally introduce these workshops. As they wrapped up, Brian felt a sense of accomplishment. Mark had not only listened, but also remained open to dialogue. Yet, lingering doubts had been awakened within him after exposing his intentions. What would happen if his efforts failed to resonate? The following day, as Brian dove deeper into designing the workshops, he was struck by a sudden realization. Could he truly integrate his personal experiences into these sessions, merging his vulnerabilities with their objectives? Suddenly, the weight of authenticity felt heavier than he had anticipated. It was a mirror reflecting not just his professional aspirations, but also a deeper introspection into who he was becoming. This was a journey that demanded courage, not just from him, but from everyone involved. And with every revelation, the ground beneath him shifted, still uncertain, but exciting. As he began drafting his initial ideas, another email pinged, a notification from Emma. "We need to talk," it read. Brian braced himself, sensing another storm brewing in his personal life. Was their newfound connection about to face its first real test? Brian stared at Emma's email, the words echoing in his mind. "We need to talk." It loomed over him like a storm cloud, threatening to rain down uncertainty onto his newly established foundation of confidence in his professional life. He couldn't ignore the tinges of anxiety twisting in his stomach, nor the way his heartbeat intensified. As he prepared for this conversation, he felt that familiar sense of vulnerability he had just begun to embrace at work creep into his personal life. Over the past few weeks, Brian had found solace in his connection with Emma. They had shared laughter, hopes, and glimpses of their insecurities, but he sensed the conversation ahead would challenge the growth he had started to nurture in himself. Would it force him to confront fears he had tried to shelve beneath his work ambitions? Realizing that avoidance would only exacerbate matters, he took a long, measured breath and reminded himself of the key theme of his new initiatives: authenticity. If he wanted to encourage transparency at work, he had to start with himself. He needed to open up, not just to his team, but to Emma as well. As he approached her soon-to-be favorite coffee shop, he reflected on how he intended to address the delicate situation. Would he navigate the conversation with careful yet straightforward honesty? The last thing he wanted was to build walls where he should be building bridges. When Brian spotted Emma seated at a small corner table, her expression was oddly pensive. She looked up as he approached, her eyes betraying a mix of relief and apprehension. "Hi," she greeted softly, gesturing to the seat across from her. The air was charged with unspoken words, a tension that Brian could almost touch. "Hi," he replied, squeezing in the chair and taking a moment to gather his thoughts. "Thanks for meeting me." Emma's gaze softened, but there was an undercurrent of something unspoken. He could sense it. She was going to lay bare her thoughts, just as he wanted his team to. "I've been thinking about us," she began, steadying her breath as she gathered her words. "There's something I need to share." Brian's heart raced, and he prepared himself for what could be a pivotal moment. Driven by empathy, he smiled encouragingly. "You can tell me anything, Emma." She paused, collecting herself, before uttering softly, "I know we've been building a connection, and it's been amazing for me, but I'm not sure how to reconcile my personal challenges with what's happening between us." Brian's pulse quickened. The way she spoke suggested something deep and complicated. "What do you mean?" he urged gently, resisting the impulse to retreat into his own uncertainties. Taking another steadying breath, Emma's words began to flow. "I've had a lot going on outside of our time together. I recently found out I'm pregnant." A silence engulfed the table. Brian's thoughts jumbled, fighting each other for dominance. The news felt surreal, like a seismic event reshaping the landscape of his life. As he processed the weight of her reality, something shifted within him. He couldn't dismiss this moment as an obstacle. It was a convergence of personal discovery and an unanticipated challenge. "How are you feeling about it?" he asked, knowing that to lead authentically meant supporting her truth unconditionally. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice trembling. "This wasn't part of my plan, and I don't know what it means for my future. And then there's you. What does this change for us?" Brian realized then that this moment of vulnerability was not just hers alone. It called for his own. Life's unpredictability had been mirrored in his professional ambitions. Both required him to lean into uncertainty and embrace the complexities of human emotions. "I'm scared too," he confessed, "but I don't want to run from this. I want to face it with you. We can figure this out together." As their eyes met, the connection deepened. It was no longer about the future alone, but about the present. They both needed to accept their reality and the possibility of personal evolution. This moment defined them, demanding courage and radical authenticity. Little by little, Brian felt a burden lift. He envisioned how their journey ahead would unfold, unpredictable but grounded in shared understanding. As the conversation flowed, ideas began to crystallize, not just about their situation, but about how empathy could be a powerful tool in every facet of his life. But within this newfound clarity lingered a question. Would this shared vulnerability with Emma enhance his ability to shape a more authentic workplace, or would it create rifts he couldn't foresee? Each thought collided in his mind like puzzle pieces. As they continued to communicate, Brian felt the edge of vulnerability deepen. Mull it over, Brian felt his breath quicken. Could this be the moment he fathomed the reckoning that might propel him into uncharted territories of leadership? "Let's move forward then," Mark finally relented, punctuating Brian's spirit with validation. "But I want you to take the lead on this. You've made it personal. I expect the same for execution. Ensure you communicate with each department, gather buy-in." "Absolutely," Brian confirmed, adrenaline surging within him. He understood the weight of this commitment. It was not merely professional, it was a journey toward instilling vulnerability as an organizational strength. The proposal blossomed into more than a plan. It became a movement rooted in authenticity, a bridge between personal growth and corporate pragmatism. As Brian prepared the rollout, he recognized how pivotal this transformation was for himself. He was gradually setting a precedent that would affect his relationships at work and at home. On the home front, he continued to engage deeply with Emma, their conversations radiating comfort amidst the developing uncertainty of their future. They shared strategies, fears, and a vision of what parenthood might manifest for them. This newfound partnership delighted Brian, each chapter unfolding new layers of connection, the emotional echoes resonating across his world. As the day of the first workshop arrived, anxiety intermingled with anticipation. Employees filed into the room, and Brian could sense the initial trepidation wash through the crowd. Yet, as he began to share his journey, his mistakes, triumphs, and challenges, he felt the room gradually shed its layers of hesitance. In that space, vulnerability morphed into communal energy, and Brian witnessed his colleagues letting down their shields. Stories emerged from unexpected places. A laughter broke the tension when they shared struggles over coffee spills, miserable failures, and delightful highs. This unity was profound. It encapsulated the essence of everything he had envisioned. As he moved through the dialogue, Brian witnessed the faces of his employees growing lighter, brighter, as they connected on a deeper level. Each shared moment was a stitch, weaving them into a cohesive fabric of empathy and mutual support. He marveled at how positively their collective experience resonated, how the connection fostered a renewed sense of commitment to one another. In that moment, a dawning realization swept over him. The man he had become was grounded not in the authority of his title, but in the humility of sharing authentically. This was success. He had proven he could navigate life's unpredictabilities, both professional and personal. As the workshop concluded, applause erupted. Employees emerged with shared smiles, breathless excitement brimming in their eyes. Brian felt a surge of pride wash over him. He had invested in fostering a culture of authenticity and connection. Later that evening, as Brian and Emma sat on the couch, awaiting the birth of their child, he reflected upon the winds of change. They had both fought against the currents of uncertainty, yet emerged transformed. In this conclusive chapter of personal growth and professional upheaval, Brian Hartley finally stood rooted in a world welcomed both ambition and vulnerability. He had not just achieved organizational success, he had conquered the complexities of his own heart. And now you need to subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. It truly makes a difference. Comment your reactions and theories about this satisfying conclusion. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this transformative journey. Don't wait even one more second to share. It's the moment to show your support for powerful stories of overcoming personal challenges.